From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Along with Randall Kowalik, I'm Jeff Wichman. Agricultural research has been a priority at Kansas State University since it was founded in 1863. Randall talked with Eric Atkinson, an agronomist in charge of two of the university's experiment fields, to get a glimpse at the research priorities in eastern Kansas. Then David Proctor, Director for Engagement and Community Development at K-State, previews the upcoming 6th National Rural Grocery Summit and its focus on sustaining rural grocery stores and improving the health of those living in rural communities. And in this week's Stop, Look, and Listen, Gus Vanderhoven asks us to remember June 6th. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. I'm Randall Kowalik. We talk a lot about K-State Research and Extension, and we encourage you to visit your local extension office, consult your local extension agent. But the next couple of days, we're going to focus on the research. Kansas State University operates 11 different agricultural research stations within Kansas. Joining us is Eric Adee, the agronomist in charge of the Kansas River Valley experiment fields near Topeka and the East Central experiment fields near Ottawa. And Eric, briefly, how would you describe your mission at the experiment fields?
Basically, we're trying to answer farmers' questions. And some of them farmers ask us directly, and some of them we are anticipating they're going to have issues or have questions. And we are specific somewhat by environment and soil type. The East Central Kansas field near Ottawa is dry land. It represents a lot of East Central Kansas, Eastern Kansas with their soil types. The Kansas River Valley is kind of a unique, very highly productive area. It's irrigated. We have 4 irrigators on our 2 farms here. And there are some very unique problems that apply that we're trying to address here, but the research also applies to other parts in the corn, soybean growing area throughout the U.S. So our research applies not just to the farmers here, but much wider scope as well.
And so what kinds of things are you looking at right now? What would you say about the research that your team does or is doing?
We work with professors and extension agronomists and also industry people where we look at a number of different things. We have, between the 2 research fields, we have about 100 different experiments going on, from variety testing, hybrid testing, data plantings, fertility, weed control, disease management, basic agronomic practices. We cover a whole range of different topics. Some of them change over time, so we try to come up with answers for the farmers.
Are there any things that your staff members specialize in?
We manage the farms to get the most accurate representation of field conditions that represent how farmers are actually farming around here. So my guys at both locations are very good technicians with equipment and managing the irrigators here down the Kansas River Valley. And we work with professors and grad students and extension agents, and we may put out the whole study for them, do all the treatments, and they come out and take the measurements, or we may just provide a space for them to bring out their own equipment and do their research. But we have capabilities. We can do replicated plot research. We have small plot equipment. We can plant the studies. We can gather yield data. And so we we try to meet the needs for researchers in any way we can.
What would you say have been some of the top projects that you've been working on the past 12, 18 months?
Two major ones we have down here in the Kansas River Valley are sudden death syndrome on soybeans. It's a disease that really limits soybean production some years here in the Kansas River Valley. And we've been working for several years. We typically have anywhere from 3 to 6 or 8 studies a year, some with researchers from campus, some with industry representatives, testing different products and different ways to combat this disease. And so we have come up with some management practices to help farmers reduce the yield loss to this disease. And it's still a very complex system, but we are making some headway. We also do a lot of corn fungicide studies and examining different products. And we have found in the last couple of years how effective they are against certain diseases. And some of them we didn't plan to be looking at, but based on the year, we have found some very effective controls for certain diseases for when they do show up.
When we think about some of these things, like, for example, the sudden death in soybeans and the corn fungicide study, let's look at the sudden death syndrome in soybeans. How would you go about setting up a study like this? How many fields are you going to be using? What varieties? Things like that. How is all of this set up? Talk a little bit about the method.
Well, one advantage we have, and as in some locations where they try to do work on sudden death, is that we seem to get it pretty regularly. And one of the reasons is partially tied to the irrigation. And that disease likes wet soils at certain time, and we can seem to be able to make that happen on a fairly consistent basis, but we'll have to see what happens this year. But we also select varieties. Like in one planting date study, I have a moderately resistant variety, and I also plant a very susceptible variety. So depending on the year, if we don't get a lot of sudden death, my susceptible variety will show symptoms. If I have a very severe year, then the more tolerant variety will help show differences between treatments. So we kind of try to manage for the disease and try to set things up so at least we get the disease, and then in case if it is very severe, we know we have ways we can collect data to see if there are differences between different treatments.
Is there anything that has come out in the past, 20 years or so, or even longer back, that you can sort of look at and say, yeah, that started here in our fields?
Since I've only been here about 8 years, I don't have a long history, but we do look at a number of products for companies. We get a first look at them. We get to try them before farmers ever see them, and a lot of things never go anywhere. They don't work well in the field for one reason or another. They may damage the crop, or they may not be effective in a field condition at reducing the pests or whatever we're looking at. But we did have one that showed up, I think it was 2013 and 14, with a seed treatment on soybeans for sudden death syndrome. And it was showing like a 25 to 30% yield increase just with this seed treatment. And currently, a lot of soybeans, I think about all of them here growing in the valley, and much of the soybean production area where they've had any history of sudden death are using this seed treatment. Now, I know they did this research at other fields, but just talking to the company reps, this was one of the main fields where they had some really good consistent data that showed the effectiveness of this product. So as far as having a widespread, very measurable impact on production that came out of these fields, that is one of them that I'm very familiar with.
Are there any obvious or not so obvious ways that your research sometimes helps both producers and consumers as well?
Yes, I think so. As I mentioned, we look at products before farmers do. Companies have us test different things, and we help screen out a lot of things so the farmers aren't the guinea pigs. Generally, it's gone through quite a bit of testing. If it doesn't work on a 10 by 30 foot plot for us, well, that's not a big loss. But if a farmer put that out there and it didn't work over several hundred acres, that could make or break him. So we can take the risk and we can sort out which of these products or which of these techniques or which of these management practices will or will not work. So we're kind of the initial screen for some of these new developments. Farmers they won't see all that we're doing, but hopefully they reap the benefits of what we do find that works. And for the consumers, indirectly, anything we can help the farmers to be more productive. If we can show them a different way to control a pest that doesn't require the much cost or require as much pesticide applied to the field, I think that's ultimately a benefit to the consumer because, first, the more efficient food production results in cheaper food, but also with different developments, advances in breeding or management of different pests, there have been cases where we have greatly reduced the amount of pesticide in the environment. Or like with the fertilizer, it used to be when fertilizer's cheap, farmers would just put on more is better. Just put it on. Well, now we've been much more environmentally conscious, partially driven by the economy because the fertilizer is more expensive. They want to make sure they get a return on every dollar they invest, but that also reduces the amount of fertilizer leaving the field, ending up in streams or groundwater or polluting the environment. So, yes, I think what our research does help the consumer through the cheaper food and also a safer, hopefully more environmentally safe food production. It helps benefits everybody as well.
That's Eric Adee, the agronomist in charge of the Kansas River Valley Experiment Fields near Topeka and the East Central Experiment Fields near Ottawa, discussing some of the agronomy research that is an ongoing, never-ending mission of Kansas State University. You're listening to Agriculture Today on the K-State Radio Network.
When a thunderstorm approaches, follow these safety tips. Lightning, known as the underrated killer, usually strikes the tallest objects, so avoid standing beneath trees or other isolated tall objects. Take shelter in a sturdy building. Remember, if you're close enough to hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. Help keep you and your family safe this severe weather season. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Millions of rural residents face limited choices and low quality in their retail food options. An important source of healthy rural food access is the retail grocery store. Unfortunately, these rural businesses are struggling. In fact, many are closing their doors. The 6th National Rural Grocery Summit, June 25th and 26th in Manhattan, sponsored by Kansas State University and a broad range of partners, will be focusing on how best to sustain rural grocery stores and improve the health of those living in rural communities. David Proctor, Director for Engagement and Community Development, Rural Grocery Initiative at Kansas State, says that the National Rural Grocery Summit was started in 2007 to help sustain and to bring grocery stores to rural Kansas. He says the research shows that it's a real blow to rural communities when they lose their grocery store.
Absolutely. We believe that, and we have done research that demonstrates that these small businesses, the rural grocery store, is really an anchor institution in small towns across Kansas. They are a vital source of health and nutrition. They have really in rural communities, they have the largest quantity and the greatest variety of healthy foods available. They are also a place where economic development happens. So they're hiring a great number of people to work in these stores. They're paying a significant amount of property taxes, sales taxes, tax monies that go to build local parks, build, sidewalks, street lights, the infrastructure that all communities need to have. And then finally, these small businesses are community hubs. They're really where people gather and see friends and see neighbors and catch up on the latest news. And so they're a special kind of business, and we think it's really important to do what we can, what Kansas State University can, to help sustain those stores.
And the research is showing that this is a vital need, this access to healthy food.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, the research shows that access to healthy food actually improves the health of citizens. And when that healthy food is not available, the health of citizens suffers. Obesity rates go up, heart issues go up, diabetes issues go up. There's just a myriad of health-related diseases that show an increase when access to healthy food is not there.
The summit will feature a number of breakout sessions, and by and large, it's kind of falling along the lines of grocery operations or healthy food access and even some funding discussions.
That's exactly it. We've tried to think about the different types of topics, as I mentioned, that are important, and they really do fall into those categories. So we want to talk about things like grocery operations, and we'll talk about customer service issues. We'll talk about management issues. We'll talk about best models for ownership and management of these grocery stores. We'll also talk about healthy food access and ways to increase sales of healthy food in these stores. And we'll talk a lot at the summit about why healthy food is important for rural communities. I think all small businesses are looking for any kind of leg up in terms of funding that they might identify. And we do have, I think, some interesting and maybe things that folks don't know about in terms of funding sources that are available for small town businesses. You can go on our Rural Grocery website, ruralgrocery.org, and there's a link to the conference on that site. And you can go to the conference, and we have the agenda online right now, and you can see the kinds of presentations and the kinds of speakers and where they're from. The other thing that I think is that I really like about this summit is that it's not so jam-packed that there's not time to spend time in the hallways talking with people.
I know you've been studying this for a long time. What are we seeing in terms of the reasons for why the grocery stores can't make it in the smaller communities? Is it the access to food that they can resell?
You know, I think that there's a number of reasons why these stores struggle. One is that, you know, unfortunately, large swaths of rural America is experiencing population decline. And so the population base that's there to go into these stores is declining. In addition, the United States is a very mobile society. And so you have folks that are living in small towns and they're working in some metropolitan center, 15, 20, 30 miles away. And oftentimes they do their shopping while they're there. So what we try and do is we try to think about, well, what are the advantages? What are the competitive advantages that small town stores might have? And really it comes down to they are really part of that community. They have an investment, a huge investment in that community. And so we want them to highlight that, to stress that, to point that out. We're glad to help them do that. We're glad to help them make that case. But really, community support is unbelievably vital. There are very small towns across Kansas and across the United States where the grocery store is thriving, and one of the biggest reasons is that there is robust community support for that store.
In terms of ownership, are you finding that it is oftentimes someone who just lives in the community, maybe a family, or are they starting to do this more as a community-wide project?
The trend is fairly slight right now, but we think that the trend line is to move more toward community-owned businesses, community-owned stores in these small towns. There's not a whole lot of evidence that one individual within the community will step up and buy a grocery store. Now, there are some entrepreneurs that own multiple stores across Kansas, and sometimes they'll see an opportunity in a town where the store closes, but they already have the experience. They already have the communication network, the distribution network, and so they might come in and pick up that store. But more and more, we're seeing communities think about owning and running the grocery store as a cooperative. Or possibly there are some that are actually doing it now as a not-for-profit operation. There are some communities where it is a partnership between local government and an entrepreneur. So we refer to that as public-private operations. And so you do see this more communal kind of ownership model, I think, occurring more and more all the time.
I think at one point we were talking about the possibility of having more of a centralized warehouse where the communities could go and get the things they needed.
You know, there is some interesting research out there that is looking at these different distribution models. The distribution of groceries to small-town grocery stores is maybe one of the, I believe, maybe one of the most complex issues out there and one of the toughest issues to crack. And this idea of a centralized warehouse, I think it holds promise, but there's a lot of moving parts. You know, you do have to set up some kind of communication system and a management system and a trucking system and a warehouse system and an inventory system. And unless there is a lead organization that somebody is willing to step up and sort of coordinate all of that, it's really a challenge for multiple individual stores to make that happen.
In terms of fresh fruit and vegetables, are we seeing that there is a connection between those rural grocery stores and local farmers?
You know, there is some of that, which is another reason why these stores, we think, are so important. Because not only are they providing healthy fruits and vegetables to their community, but many times they are supporting local growers in the area. So it's not unusual to walk into small-town grocery stores during this time of year and really all summer and fall and see tomatoes or corn or cucumbers or green peppers or whatever it might be that are coming from a farmer that is really part of the community as well. Another thing that's happening that we think is also very exciting is that some of these grocery stores are turning their parking lot over to a farmer's market once a week. And in this case, there'll be multiple local growers that'll bring their produce into town or their fresh meat into town. And again, it's a way that these businesses, these small businesses, are supporting local farmers in their area.
This is important, especially, I'm assuming, for some of the at-risk people in the community, the elderly who maybe don't drive, and maybe someone else who has young children and doesn't have the flexibility to go 20 or 30 miles.
You've hit it on the head. I said a little bit ago that we're a mobile society, and folks, they work out of town, they shop out of town. But, there are categories of folks in these small towns where mobility is not so easy, where transportation is an issue. Both my parents are still alive, thank goodness. But I don't think it's great if they're out on the road at night driving 30 miles round trip to, buy a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk. And I think there's probably a lot of folks that are listening to the radio today that would say the same thing about their parents or their grandparents. And so the small-town grocery store is important because they can either have a friend, go to the store for them, or maybe they can still drive in that small town, or maybe it's close enough they can walk. So that's an issue. And then the other issue is there is poverty in our rural communities. And with that poverty sometimes comes unreliable transportation. And so this idea that you can just hop in your car and drive 30 miles round trip, 40 miles round trip to a grocery store, that just isn't the case for some people. And really it affects those families and the children in those families a lot.
That's David Proctor, Director for Engagement and Community Development, Rural Grocery Initiative at Kansas State University. The National Rural Grocery Summit will be held in Manhattan June 25th and 26th. To find out more information about the summit, visit ruralgrocery.org. ruralgrocery.org. This is the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wichman. In today's agricultural news, to help streamline produce safety requirements for farmers, the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration have announced the alignment of the USDA Harmonized Good Agricultural Practices Audit Program with the requirements of the FDA Food Safety Modernization Act's Produce Safety Rule. According to Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue, specialty crop farmers who take advantage of a USDA harmonized GAP audit will now have a much greater likelihood of also passing an FSMA inspection. The Produce Safety Rule, which went into effect in late January, establishes science-based minimum standards for the safe growing, harvesting, packaging, and holding of fruits and vegetables grown for human consumption. The rule is part of the FDA's ongoing efforts to implement FSMA. For more information, go to fda.gov. Well, excessive heat is not great for corn, but Stephanie Ho talked to a USDA meteorologist who says better to have the heat now rather than later in the crop's development.
Farmers who grow crops in the Midwest know that when it comes to the weather, timing is everything.
Crops can withstand high heat. 100-degree temperatures would be the death knell of corn if the corn was tasseling and silking. Early on in the crop development stage, it's certainly not good for corn, but it does not have the same impact as if that corn was reproductive.
That was USDA meteorologist Eric Atkinson, who says the center of the country has recently been having a hot time.
We've seen temperatures over the last 7 days averaging 10 to 20 degrees above normal across the Central Plains, northeastward into the upper Midwest. So we've had heat with temperatures getting well up into the lower 100s.
What does the heat do for already dry areas when it rains just a little?
So when you do get the rain, you're tapping into that moisture very quickly. You're losing it either through evaporation or through evapotranspiration, where what vegetation is growing loses that moisture very quickly.
He adds that the recent rainfall, while welcome, hasn't been consistent enough to reverse longer-term dryness.
It's hit and miss across the central Corn Belt. Some of the areas that have missed, we're looking at an area along the Missouri-Iowa border extending east into parts of Illinois and Indiana. Some of these same areas saw triple-digit heat over the last 7 days, with readings as high as 102 degrees Fahrenheit.
The remnants of former tropical storm Alberto brought more rain to some areas, but not to everywhere that needs it.
On either side of that storm path, the storm moving north, so you have a north-south oriented rain band. On either side of that, we have increasingly dry conditions that we're going to have to keep a close eye on as producers try and get their corn and soybean crops established.
So back to the problem of high heat.
The Corn Belt historically does not get a whole lot of heat, especially in the central and eastern Corn Belt. There's the reason they grow corn there.
So if the temperatures are going to be higher than normal there,
let's get it out of the way now. As you get later on in the crop development cycle, in particular reproduction into early grain fill, that's when triple-digit heat is really detrimental to the crop yield potential.
And what else is needed?
We will get early season heat, triple-digit heat, but it doesn't affect the yield potential as long as you get timely rain a little bit after that heat.
So the heat and the rain are both okay, just in the right order. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
In other agricultural news, a coalition of biofuel and agriculture groups has petitioned the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to change its regulations to account for lost volumes of renewable fuel resulting from what it calls the unprecedented number of retroactive small refinery exemptions from renewable fuel standard obligations recently granted by EPA. The parties on the petition are the Renewable Fuels Association, American Coalition for Ethanol, Growth Energy, National Biodiesel Board, National Corn Growers Association, Biotechnology Industry Organization, and National Farmers Union. The petition comes after several ethanol and farm groups challenged 3 specific small refinery exemptions granted by EPA. While the lawsuit in the 10th Circuit challenged those exemptions as wrongly decided, this petition to EPA seeks a broader, forward-looking remedy to account for the collective lost volumes caused by the unprecedented number of retroactive small refinery exemptions. Well, in this week's Soybean Update, Greg Akagi visits with Lacey Strickland.
Lacey Strickland joins us. She will be a senior at Lebec County High School and was the recipient of the FFA State Proficiency Award in oil crop production. Lacey, can you briefly discuss your SAE and how it was related to the award area?
I have two older brothers, my dad and I, that just really had a passion for farming growing up. You know, I was always the annoying little sister that wanted to be one of the boys for the longest time and was trying to grasp any knowledge that I could. And, you know, over the years, I kept listening and I kept listening. It's hard, especially being a woman in this field. You really have to prove yourself to have, you know, my dad and my brothers put some real faith and trust behind me. And I had to prove myself so I could gain more roles and responsibilities, you know, in this area for myself. So it was starting out sitting on a Carhartt jacket, learning how to drive at 7, moving the old truck to and from fields to help them, you know, get moved around. To today, I can operate auto steer. I can, you know, go to the fields, cultivate, and really stepped up my roles and responsibilities over the few years to help out the family farm.
What do you think has been the greatest challenge you faced in this award area, and how did you overcome it?
I think the biggest thing is the weather. With the farm being located in southeast Kansas, Lebec County, you can be 2 weeks from a flood and you're 2 days from a drought. And so you have to kind of be a little bit more proactive with the weather and stuff and be more thankful when you're thinking of what you're going to apply, whether that be the fertilizers and stuff. And time management is a big one because, you know, I'm the kind of person that wants to go, and you really have to be careful on when you want the go aspect versus slowing down and take it back and really thinking things through before, you know, you're just jumping towards decisions. You know, my dad and my brothers have really helped me out in that aspect.
What are some of those experiences and opportunities that you think is going to impact you as you move on in the future?
I think what's really taught me is that, you know, you really have to have a strong work ethic for it. Work ethic is the biggest thing that you need in life, especially in school and even in farming and stuff. Like, there's always something to be done around the farm, and, you know, there's always something to be done in life. You really just have to be determined and stuff. You don't really want to slack off. You always want to stay persistent and keep going, keep that drive going. And that's one thing that my parents really instilled on me through farming and in life.
And the Kansas Soybean Commission is the sponsor of the FFA State Proficiency Award in oil crop production. Lacey, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that was Lacey Strickland who joins us. She's a senior at Lebec County High School and the recipient of the FFA State Proficiency Award in oil crop production, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update.
And that's a look at agricultural news. This reminder to listen to Agriculture Today anytime, visit agtoday.net, where you can listen on demand and find links to subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Stitcher Radio. Agriculture Today is back in just a moment. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today.
He was desperately thinking about a possible appointment he was to keep and might have forgotten had I not reminded him.
Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
I said to him as he left, "Remember, Wednesday, June 6. Don't forget. Don't ever forget." He looked at me kind of puzzled and said, "I don't understand," with a somewhat surprised look at my sudden outburst as he was leaving. His company had just finished placing new shingles on the house, and we had looked at a few finishing touches. I was happy with the job they had done. No problem. But don't forget June 6. As I talked, I could see he had no clue. He was desperately thinking about a possible appointment he was to keep, and might have forgotten had I not reminded him. But that was not it. He said, "You have to tell me." I did. And I wonder how many of you remember the date. June 6, 74 years ago. It was the day Eisenhower decided and said, "We go," with the planned landing. I don't remember the exact words, but the decision was made. Go. And go they did. The seas were still choppy, but there was this small and needed window of better weather needed to try to get enough personnel and material ashore to make a successful landing. We remember, or should remember, Omaha Beach and the others, Utah. There was gold, Juneau, and swords. Enough has been written about this event of World War II. There is The Longest Day by Cornelius Ryan, D-Day, June 6, 1944, by Stephen Ambrose, Decision in Normandy by Carl D'Este. I've other books written by French authors who witnessed the landings from their side, from being occupied to being liberated. Yes, it was 74 years ago, and we have gone through other wars and are still at war, fighting. Maybe after 74 years we should forget. After all, it was the war of our grandfathers. His old army jacket may still be hanging in the attic, forgotten. It does not surprise me. However, the day of the landings, when it was announced by radio across the nation, the world, the nation must have held its breath. Try to think back and remember if you can. I'm 86, and I can remember my parents speaking in hushed voices, coming together with friends and looking at old maps. They were holding their breath. In church, one could not pray. We were still occupied in the Netherlands and would be for close to another year. But the landing was a success. They got ashore and slowly, ever so slowly, started to push inland and get a better foothold. There had been other landings before, but D-Day is the one I will always remember. Years ago, through a friend, I met now an old soldier who then was young, very young, and who went ashore with the first waves as a medic. Charles had gone back now several times as an old man, and he's well in his 90s now. He's amazing. But imagine witnessing the carnage as a young soldier. It won't be long, and there will be no more living soldiers who took part in the landings. Even those who remember are getting old. And that is the reason I like to ask the question and remind people around me. Over the years, I've met people who fought, and I've always thanked them. They helped liberate the country and me. They may have flown across it or were in an air battle above occupied Dutch territory. They may have sailed by the low coastline on patrol, or they may have come across the borders and rivers. They may even have come down by parachute. By the time the army reached the Netherlands in March 1945, June 6, 1944 was long behind them. Mark Zulke wrote the book, On to Victory, the Canadian Liberation of the Netherlands, March 23 till May 5, 1945. It were Canadians who liberated us, but that stage of the war began June 6, 1944 at Normandy at tremendous cost of lives. But they made it. They got ashore and pushed inland. I know there were American soldiers who still had learned to speak German at home as grandparents from Germany had come to the United States. I've talked with older friends who were in the military and after the war were stationed in Germany and while there looked up family, the old home place, the village, the churches, and old cemeteries. They saw their family name on old mossed tombstones, and they must have wondered. Over the years, I've saved the comic strip from Charles Schulz. He died years ago, but he drew a comic strip for the June 6 papers, where Snoopy is swimming ashore, through and between the mined obstacles. Snoopy's face is determined, with the helmet over his floppy ears. The comic strip says, June 6, 1944, to remember. I have 3 of the similar strips, all by Schulz, copied from the very first one they ran, and I don't know when that was, but I have 1973, 2014, and 2015. I had hoped the Manhattan Mercury would remember, and this year again use that comic strip. And they did, and I'm thankful. A comic strip with so much meaning and memories to remember. Never forget.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas.
And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.